The Prix Galien is a welcome initiative to stimulate creative research and promote excellence. Barack Obama. The Galien Awards ceremony is considered the equivalent of the Oscars night for the innovators in the labs and awards every year the best pharmaceutical product, the best biotechnology product, the best medical technology, best digital health, best incubator accelerator, best startup.
This is the right event, on the right issue, at the right time.
I thank His Excellency, the President, for bringing Prix Galien to Africa, and I look forward to the day when we will celebrate an African winner of the Prix Galien.
I'm particularly grateful to receive this award.
The awards are among the highest honors in science and commerce because they lead to improvement in the human condition.
The Prix Galien Awards recognize the world's brightest minds and most innovative companies. They are a true celebration of the hard work required to produce life-changing interventions.
That is what makes us optimistic about the future.
Congratulations to all of you.
Make a difference. Join the Galien Foundation.
Welcome to the Galien Foundation Week of Innovation. My name is Sanskriti Thakur, Chief Growth Officer with clinical trials company Medable, and I will be your moderator today. We hope to share with you in this discussion the inspiration behind the Prix Galien USA Awards to be held this Thursday here in New York. And it's especially timely as the Galien Foundation has marked its 50th Golden Jubilee year. This year, the USA Galien Awards has recorded 147 nominees for our 6 categories from 126 companies, covering 15 diverse therapeutic areas ranging from cancer, cardiology, neurosciences, infectious diseases, rare genetic diseases, and vaccines, and more. This across pharmaceuticals, biotechnology, medical devices, digital health, and other important categories. It is our time and opportunity to honor this science and its service to humanity. In the best pharmaceutical category, which is today's area of focus, we've devoted time to these 6 nominees in chronic and autoimmune disorders, a category of great global medical unmet need. Note that this webinar will be including questions for the audience, so please do share them with us as we have this discussion. Now I would like to introduce the 5 nominees and representatives of these critical innovations who are joining us today. Sarah Ackerman, Executive Medical Director at Alkermes Pharma, Robert Blaustein, AVP Global Clinical Development with Merck, Bev Incledon, Executive and CSO with VP Ironshore Pharma, Volker Nappertz, Head of R&D at Aurinia Pharma, and Mike Vincent, CSO Inflammation and Immunology with the research unit at Pfizer. Just so all of this audience knows, there is more information to be found about these individuals, their companies, and the nominated products in a 100-word statement. Now I would like each of these panelists and nominees to please introduce themselves and tell us about the product that has been nominated and its importance to this industry. Let's go ahead and start with Sarah.
Thank you, Sans. I'm really grateful to be part of this discussion today. I'm Sarah Ackerman, a psychiatrist by background and an executive medical director at Alkermes, a company focusing on the unmet needs for patients with serious mental illness, substance use disorders, or cancer. Alkermes is honored to be nominated today for Lybalvi. Lybalvi is a combination of olanzapine, an atypical antipsychotic, and samidorphan, an opioid antagonist, indicated for the treatment of schizophrenia in adults and bipolar I disorder in adults as an acute treatment of manic or mixed episodes, as monotherapy, and as an adjunct to lithium or valproate, as well as a maintenance monotherapy. Weight gain has limited the utility of olanzapine, an established and highly effective antipsychotic, So focusing our research efforts on a new mechanism to approach the challenge of antipsychotic associated weight gain, while leveraging a body of literature, our development program for Lybalvi sought to reduce olanzapine-associated weight gain with the addition of samidorphan.
Thank you, Sarah. Why don't we move on to Bev?
Hi everyone, thanks, Sans. My name is Bev Enkelden, and I'm the Chief Scientific Officer and the Head of Research and Development for Ironshore Pharmaceuticals. Just a little bit about me and my background. I've been in this industry for about 30 years now and had the opportunity to work on in some very big companies, and in the latter part of my career with some very, very small startup type companies, which includes Ironshore. Ironshore, and I speak for everyone in the company, and there's not that many of us, when I say we are absolutely thrilled to be here and be nominated for this award. I think it really speaks volumes to the innovation, but also to the team that has helped bring us here. The innovation in the product that we're focused on is Jornay PM. And Jornay PM is a stimulant medication for the treatment of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And this particular product is the first and only stimulant medication that can be dosed at night. And it's dosed at night such that the product is on board and working at first thing when a patient wakes up in the morning, and then it continues to work throughout the entire day right up until the point in time of bedtime. And I think some of the the innovations in the product that are unique to Jornay over all the other stimulants are, one, it has no immediate release part within it. So it's a very smooth profile without spikes and peaks and valleys, which I think results in a very favorable clinical profile. And additionally, it's the only product that is absorbed in the colon, whereas all other stimulant medications are absorbed in the upper bowel. This one's absorbed in the colon, and that gives it some very unique clinical characteristics we'll get into in a bit later. So thank you, Sans, and thanks for having us.
Well, welcome, Bev. And let's go ahead and hear Mike, and then Rob, and then Volker's introductions.
Thanks, Sans. So I'm Mike Vincent. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer for the Inflammation and Immunology Research Unit at Pfizer. I've been trying to develop drugs for patients in need for the last 20 years. And prior to that, I was a practicing rheumatologist and did basic immunology research in academics. So the product that Pfizer is very proud and excited to be nominated for is Cibinqo, also known as abrocitinib. This is a JAK1 inhibitor with activity targeted on the JAK1 pathway that's FDA approved for the treatment of adults with moderate to severe eczema, also known as atopic dermatitis, that did not respond to other treatments and is not well controlled with prescription medicines, including biologics. In clinical trials of over 1,600 people, Cibinqo was proven to help provide clearer skin and itch relief. Furthermore, in studies of 778 people, more people saw 75% skin improvement with Cibinqo alone versus placebo after just 3 months. And more people felt itch reduction taking Cibinqo alone versus placebo after just 2 weeks. Clear skin and faster itch reduction. We know that existing products fail to give this level of relief in more than half of patients. And we know that the time to itch relief for existing biologic products is much slower than with the oral medicine abrocitinib or Cibinqo. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And how about Rob and Volker?
Thanks, Hans. It's great to be here. I'm Robert Blaustein. I'm trained initially as a cardiologist and basic scientist, and actually had an academic career, research career prior to joining Merck about 13 years ago. And at Merck, I lead all our late-stage heart failure development efforts. And over the past several years, specifically, have led the vericiguat development team through its pivotal phase 3 trial, registration, and eventual approval for the treatment of heart failure in patients who have worsening, what we call worsening heart failure. This has been an effort that we work very closely with the Bayer company on. It's an equal partnership for this development effort. Vericiguat was initially developed at the Bayer company. Both teams had been working on a similar mechanism for a number of years and decided to join forces. And what's unique about vericiguat is that it targets a pathway in the heart and blood vessels that no other drug targets right now. It's a pathway that links a gas, nitric oxide, with an enzyme, soluble guanylate cyclase, and a signaling molecule, cyclic GMP, that goes on and does a number of important functions in the heart and blood vessels. And in heart failure, that pathway is disrupted. So the teams working together developed an agent that can augment this signaling pathway in states where nitric oxide is not available. So that's one unique aspect about this. And another is that we focused specifically on a group of patients who have heart failure who are at the the highest risk of having a heart failure, a recurrent event like a heart failure hospitalization or death. And that's a little unique in terms of the other heart failure medications that are out there. And so vericiguat is actually the only drug specifically approved for the treatment of those patients.
Thank you, Robert. And last but not least, what about Volker?
Galien, I was privileged to be with you all a couple of years ago. I'm Volker Knappertz. I'm a physician scientist by background and training. My clinical training was in neurology. It's great to hear that people in the neurosciences are also present here today on the panel. And my love has always been immunology from my early days on. And I did a lot of work in the pharmaceutical industry over the last 25 years in developing immunological agents. I am the head of research and development at Aurinia Pharmaceuticals, and the product that we obtained approval from probably at the worst time to bring a drug to the market in January 2021 during the height of the second wave of the pandemic is LUPKYNIS. LUPKYNIS is a unique product. It's an oral medication that is a calcineurin inhibitor that has been developed and is approved for the treatment of lupus nephritis. Systemic lupus erythematosus is a well understood disease, and lupus nephritis is one of the organ manifestations of lupus. The condition is pretty insidious and presents itself at times with end-stage renal disease and end-stage kidney disease. It has a fairly prolonged course and is characterized by proteinuria, which in itself is indolent and often not recognized by the patient. The patient population is 90% women and disproportionately affects minorities, especially African American and Hispanic origin people. LUPKYNIS is able to, within our clinical trial context, to more than double, almost triple the complete renal response rate after a year. And I will tell you more about the details later, but LUPKYNIS is making an impact in the addition, as an addition to MMF and steroids already in those patients by have almost tripling the response rate on the complete renal response within those lupus nephritis patients.
Thank you. And thank you to the panelists and also these scientists for not just sharing with us a little bit about the product and the innovation, but also for their investment in this category, which is one that is truly one of unmet need, will continue to be growing in unmet need. And so let's begin the joint discussion on that topic. There was a compelling reason for your company to focus on this disease state, to meet the unmet needs of this category for these patients. And I'd like to hear from you as to what that is. And in the context of the patients and the audience, who perhaps are not scientists themselves. Why did you do all this work to bring this innovative product to this category? So why don't we go ahead and we can start with Rob on this one.
Sure, thanks. We've recognized for many years that heart failure is a disabling condition and a very common one. And furthermore, it's actually increasing in frequency as our population ages, as things like hypertension and coronary artery disease continue to affect more patients. The number of patients who experience heart failure is growing. Now, there are a number of approved medications that have been developed over the past several decades, some in the past couple of years to treat this condition, and that's of course wonderful. And reassuringly, we watched the event rate, which means the frequency of patients requiring a hospitalization or dying. We've watched that event rate go down over time as we've developed these newer therapies. Nevertheless, the mortality and morbidity of heart failure remains unacceptably high, particularly for those who've had a recent event. That could be a heart failure hospitalization in the past bunch of months, or even some who've needed to have their doctor give them intravenous diuretic medications to remove fluid. Those patients are at particularly high need. And so we chose to focus our development program on that group of patients. And it's a very challenging group of patients because the sicker the patient, often the tougher it is to intervene and see an important difference. Nevertheless, we took that risk and we did in fact see an important benefit in the risk of either dying or being hospitalized for heart failure. So I think it was the recognition, one, of heart failure as a growing problem, and two, we could try to focus on a particular group of such patients that some of the other medications have not specifically focused on.
Thank you, Robert. What about Bev with a very different therapeutic area and patient category? You might be on mute. There you are. Uh-oh, one more time.
I'm good. I think we were battling back and forth between the host and me on the mute button. Thanks, Henson. And actually, while very, very different, we're going to talk about attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, but a couple of things that, Robert, you noted about this growing condition, about although well managed and treated, and there are a lot of products out there, that's very much the case with ADHD, there is very significant unmet needs within that patient population. And really, this was the driver. And it not only was it the driver for why we chose this as an indication, but it's actually was why Ironshore as a company was founded. And it was actually a very close family friend of our founder who had terrible struggles with ADHD and children with ADHD, specifically in the morning. And getting folks up and going. And the morning is a particularly challenging time because it's chaotic. It's chaotic in everybody's lives, I think. But it's a very hard stop, and you got to get to work and get to school and all these other things. And plus, you're driving and being well controlled and medicated and paying attention and through that time period is critical. And the current medications, because again they're dosed in the morning, they take a significant amount of time for the onset. And really, that's what the focus of this whole development was to try and cover that period of time such that the mornings would be under control, but without compromising the latter parts of the day, because of course, we need to make sure that patients have symptom control through their day, through their school day, their work day, and into the evening. And so that was the challenge. And of course, how do you do that? You have to dose at night, but in order to do that, you need precision and accurate delivery of a medication that can cause significant sleep disruptions first thing in the morning. So this is why we developed the product specifically for morning, but then also noticed, and as we started to see within our clinical trials, where we specifically were measuring the morning and the evening through novel scales, And we noticed that we had a very robust effect all the way through to bedtime, but also we started to see things where we thought we might have a better tolerability profile, less crash at the end of the day, less irritation associated with spikes in the formulation. And we also started to hear a lot of things about people eating better. And appetite is a major problem, and weight loss a major problem with stimulant medication. So we started to see some more of these attributes coming through with the formulation, which we believe is due to the colonic absorption and the smooth pharmacokinetics. So really, that's where it was. It was developed specifically for a morning area of unmet need, without compromising the rest of the day. But we started to see some of these great benefits through the rest of the day as we started to get through our clinical programs.
That's great to hear, especially the health and quality of life benefits that you seem to be noticing. How about Sarah, from your perspective on the mental health category?
Yes, so Alkermes as a company has a long history in the development of treatments for patients with serious mental illness. And thinking about schizophrenia and bipolar I disorder, they are chronic illnesses with a really significant impact on the lives of patients, each affecting about 1% of the population in the U.S. So a high prevalence rate. As my fellow panelists, Bev and Robert, have noted so far, there are treatments available. Antipsychotics are a class of medication commonly used in treatment, but at least in our experience, many patients find the current treatments to be inadequate, in part due, in this case, to side effects. So it often puts patients in a position to have to choose between the efficacy of a medication and the tolerability. Weight gain in particular is something that we focused on, and weight gain is often associated with certain antipsychotics, and not only has a profound impact on the lives of patients in ways such as self-esteem and willingness to take medication, but significant impact on morbidity and mortality. The life expectancy for patients with serious mental illness is substantially decreased compared to the general population, and that is in part due to risk factors like weight gain and cardiometabolic comorbidities. So a number of studies over the past couple of decades have attempted to address antipsychotic-associated weight gain, really with mixed results. So as a company, we took a different approach to addressing antipsychotic-associated weight gain. We built on our internal expertise in opioid antagonist molecules, also known as opioid receptor blockers, and also leveraged literature demonstrating that opioid receptors play a role in regulating weight and metabolism, potentially through mechanisms involving food reward or modulation of insulin sensitivity. We then combined a proprietary opioid antagonist, samidorphan, with olanzapine, an antipsychotic that's widely regarded as highly efficacious and sought to mitigate the weight gain that olanzapine is known for. So focusing our research efforts on this new mechanism while leveraging literature led to the development of Lybalvi, thus addressing a longstanding unmet need in the field of psychiatry.
Thank you, Sarah. And what about, Volker, back to you on the topic and the unmet needs surrounding lupus nephritis?
Yes, thank you. So the founders of the company have a very interesting history on how lupus was developed and how lupus was targeted then for lupus nephritis, the kidney and organ manifestation of lupus that is insidious. It is progressive and leads to end-stage renal disease, then requiring either renal transplant or dialysis, a pretty grim prognosis. It is also, as I mentioned, indolent and manifests itself often towards the end of the preservation of renal function. Also, the awareness of the lupus end organ manifestation in the kidney is not sufficiently there necessarily, even in the medical community or within the patient community. The founders really came, one of the founders came from a renal transplant background and really wanted to help prevent these kidneys from failing towards the end. And there was a lot of thinking about the class of CNIs and whether there was improvements that could be made. And indeed, through some very in-depth medicinal chemical alterations of a CNI scaffold, a calcineurin inhibitor scaffold, going through I think about 100 different modifications, they were experimentally able to find a medication that promised to be more efficacious and better tolerated. But as drug development goes, at times you are surprised positively or negatively, especially within the small molecule world. And we were fortunate as a company to be encountering many positive surprises. So this disease disproportionately affects minorities, especially African American women and Hispanic women. There have been many treatment failures, both for lupus, so systemic lupus erythematosus, SLE, but also specifically in lupus nephritis, and especially with drugs that have usually been or have become bedrocks and mainstays for the treatment of autoimmune diseases such as rituximab, ocrelizumab, abatacept. These have all failed in the treatment of lupus or lupus nephritis. So for the longest time, this became a disease where it was very difficult to get innovators to take those risks. Also, prior to the availability of LUPKYNIS, there were only about 20% of patients who had complete response from their various therapies. So LUPKYNIS then was trialed on the backdrop of MMF, mycophenolate, and steroids. And the astounding findings were that indeed it was able to increase the number of patients by 2.7-fold who were able to achieve the complete renal response. Over 40% of patients were able to do so within 1 year. The onset of action was extraordinarily quick with regards to controlling the proteinuria or reversing the proteinuria. And that was an unexpected finding, the speed within weeks, a couple of months at which that occurred. And the other surprising and positively surprising finding was that it actually showed higher improvement rates in the minority populations. And it is heartwarming to see on how people who are afflicted by lupus nephritis really are able to take control of their disease. They have a measurable biomarker, which is the urine protein creatinine ratio, and that urine proteinuria can be very well controlled, which then further helps patients to start and stay with the therapy. Additionally, the glomerular filtration rate appears to be favorably influenced by voclosporin, and we were also able to continue the study after the 1-year primary study into a 3-year placebo-controlled study, and those data continue to be extraordinarily encouraging. Without any loss in efficacy over that period, of that extended period of 3 years. When I saw the data for the first time, I have to admit I've been in the drug development space now for 25 years, have seen many drugs in large cap pharma companies come and go. It's astounding to see this level of efficacy in a disease that was deemed to be very difficult to target and to treat.
Thank you, Volker. And now to round us out, how about Mike, you tell us a little bit about the space in AD and the great work that you're doing with Pfizer.
Thanks. So atopic dermatitis or allergic eczema is a highly prevalent condition. And like some of the other speakers have mentioned, allergies of all types are increasing in the population, which just adds to the unmet need. It's a disease that impacts quality of life, and there are very limited systemic treatment options, unlike some of the other areas that we've discussed already. Really, up until recently, it was thought to be primarily a disease of children, But in fact, 5 to 10% of people over the age of 18 suffer from atopic dermatitis in the United States. So a really prevalent condition. It's also a disease that affects patients around the clock. Itching of their skin can interrupt their sleep, and also a disfiguring rash can disrupt their everyday lives. Very importantly, we also know that it's not just the physical burden, but the emotional burden of inflammatory and autoimmune skin diseases that can be profound. For many patients, it's not just physical. In 2019, 5 advocacy organizations and patient advocates held called, we all heard firsthand that still their symptoms. At the time that Sabinco was approved, there was really only one systemic dermatitis, a biologic injected associated allergy. When that way, we realized that in addition to cytokines, there were additional acts that present in patients with the cytokine addressed with the existing biologic. And then very importantly, a fourth cytokine known as IL-31 directly activates nerve cells to create the sensation of itch. And we knew that JAK1 inhibition could also block IL-31 signaling. A couple limitations of the existing therapy were, one, the response rate. So more than 60% of patients with the existing therapy didn't achieve the benchmark of improvement that's used in atopic dermatitis, or 75% improvement of skin disease. And we, with our 200 milligram dose, actually achieved that in almost 60% of patients. An additional need that I alluded to when talking about the biology of the molecule was the speed of itch relief. So the existing therapy that's approved for systemic treatment really takes quite some time for the itch to improve. Whereas with inhibition of that IL-31 cytokine, within 2 weeks, patients saw significant relief of itch. And then lastly, I think we all know that injectable therapies, they work for people, but generally speaking, people would prefer to take an oral therapy than one they needed to get a shot for. And that's another advantage of that Sabinco brings, convenient oral delivery.
Thank you, Mike. Now let's move to the discussion of outcomes and also the response of the clinicians. Many of you have spoken about the mechanisms of action and the unmet need, but with the many years of investment in the R&D and the development and multi-billion-dollar costs of making these products come to market, outcomes matter and using the product matters. So given the variable product experiences on market, would love your perspective on those outcomes and how those clinicians are responding to the innovation. How about we start with who haven't we start with? How about we start with Sarah this time, and then we'll go to Volker.
Great. So Lybalvi became available late last year. So real-world experience is just starting to emerge. And so far, the experience is really consistent with the safety and efficacy that was established in our clinical trial program. I think the enthusiasm we're hearing from the healthcare community is in part based on the fact that so few new medications are developed to treat psychiatric disorders. So we look forward to continuing to collect real-world data to characterize the patient experience on Lybalvi and support post-marketing research to address additional data gaps through our internal research, as well as supporting the research community through an investigator-initiated research program.
Thank you. Regarding the measurable impact of loop kinase that we have seen in the clinical trial data, and that translates into the real world, it really is the rapid reduction in the proteinuria, which is not just an indicator, but it is part of the pathophysiological process within lupus nephritis is impressive. And as we're talking to the initial adopters of loop kinase, which are a mix of really nephrologists treating it from the nephrology point of view, but also rheumatologists who are treating lupus and continue to treat patients for their organ manifestations of lupus. So we do see a circling around the key clinical benefits in those adopting prescribers of loop kinase. Clinicians have historically been quite disappointed with other treatment regimens. As with many underserved autoimmune conditions, frequently clinicians had to retreat to using concurrent high-dose corticosteroids with all of their long-term or medium to long-term complications and intolerabilities that makes it basically prohibitive to continue with high-dose steroids for any extended period of time. But it was necessary to control the lupus kidney manifestations of lupus nephritis. This now, with the addition of loop kinase to the regimen, has proven to continue to be able, patients continue to be able to be held on very low doses of corticosteroids without needing to increase those for flares or other forms of exacerbation or worsening, which is novel to these physicians and clinicians to adapt to a different regimen for the long-term management. The other piece, obviously, as mentioned by one of the co-panelists, it's an oral therapy, which is always preferred. It's a twice-a-day oral therapy and makes it easy to add to the other medications that most of these patients are on, and the mycophenolate, which is part of the regimen with loop kinase. Physicians know that they can use loop kinase in addition to the standard of care, and that they can control and protect the progression of the renal dysfunction and the progression of the nephritic condition. Also, the fact that the results show higher improvement rates in the minority populations that affect disproportionately these patients with this condition has helped and has opened opportunities for communications within those patient communities. And we are continuing to reach out in trying to really gain access and adherence to patients that otherwise may not have benefited or will not benefit from our treatment. The long-term data that we've created in a placebo-controlled fashion is almost unique in today's drug development, and really gives very important 3-year placebo-controlled information, albeit open label for the last 2 years, but it does fully corroborate the sustainability and durability of the responses achieved.
Thank you, Volker. And maybe now, Robert, just considering the amount of experience that the industry has in heart failure, you could continue to reinforce what you're seeing in the clinical outcomes and clinician response in your product.
Yes, thanks. So one aspect of cardiovascular development that is a little bit unique is that the regulatory pathway to approval typically requires, not always, but typically requires that one evaluate the most serious outcomes that are out there, in particular death. And we focus on death due to cardiovascular causes, but also look at things like heart failure, hospitalization. And those are the two most important metrics that we evaluate in a heart failure trial. And those are the ones that regulators look very carefully at. And so fortunately, when we ran our pivotal phase 3 trial of vericiguat compared to placebo, we did see that at the end of the trial, we saw a statistically significant and, more importantly, a clinically relevant reduction in that combined risk of either dying or having heart failure hospitalization. And importantly, that the risk that we reduced with vericiguat treatment was 10% on the relative scale. But because the event rate was so high in this trial, these are the sicker heart failure patients, that actually translates into an absolute risk reduction, which was quite high, about 4%, which in turn one can use to develop or derive a number needed to treat. That number answers the question of, in a given year, how many patients do you have to treat to see a reduction in either a heart failure hospitalization or a cardiovascular death? And that number was close to about 24. And just for feel and for reference, typically if you can get in a cardiovascular therapy, if you can get that number below 50, that's quite good. And some of the other modern heart failure therapies that have been approved had a number similar to that number, around in the 20s or so. So we were very happy with the measurable impact that we saw with this drug. I think because it's a new drug, it's taking a while for physicians to best understand where this fits into the armamentarium of other heart failure drugs, particularly those more recently approved. So we're hopeful that as physicians get a little bit more comfortable, that use will continue to grow. I think one thing we're encouraged by is that the data from our trial demonstrated that treatment vericiguat was very well tolerated. Some of the other side effects that you see from other medications, we really didn't see much in the way of patients feeling a little too faint, what we call symptomatic hypotension, compared to placebo. And so that was very reassuring. We didn't see problems with people's potassium or people's kidney function. Everything was pretty much the same as placebo. So that the safety profile coupled with the efficacy are the two benchmarks that one looks at for a novel therapy in this area. And I think we felt happy with the results on both counts, as did the regulators.
Thank you, Robert. And now Mike and then Bev, let's round us out on additional perspective on the clinical outcome and the clinician response.
Yeah, I've already mentioned that with Sabinco, the percentage of patients getting clear skin is higher than with existing therapies. And as well, the relief from itch is faster. As you might imagine, with a symptom like itch, which is so apparent to the patient, when we collect patient-reported outcomes, such as quality of life related to their skin condition, we can see a clear benefit with Sabinco in those patients. In the community, I think it's fairly common among physicians who treat inflammatory disease to really appreciate having different treatment options that hit different mechanisms. Atopic dermatitis is a heterogeneous condition, so there are differences in the underlying patient population that might favor one or another therapy. So having different mechanistic treatment options is something that dermatologists who care for patients with atopic dermatitis, similar to other physicians who treat inflammatory disease, appreciate. So we're very excited to see the drug, which launched just recently, as have some of the others that have been mentioned. But we think our clinical data really reflects the profound benefit that patients are feeling when they take Sabinco.
I'll just make a couple of comments. Thanks, Michael. I think like as Sarah mentioned, we are actively generating a lot of real-world data, as with others fairly recently launched, and dealing with some of the issues that the pandemic has caused. I think those data are taking some time to get a substantial base of data to be looking at there. But I think also similar to what other folks have said, what we see in the field and what we see in the real world is very consistent with what we saw in our clinical programs. But I think where we see the biggest, or where we're, and again, these are the pleasant surprises that Volker, you mentioned, where we see what is most encouraging to us is the pleasant surprises that we're seeing. We expected to see that profound and dramatic effect in the morning, because that's really how the product was designed and was very robust with the treatment effect in the morning. But it's the physician response and the other patient groups that they're starting to use our product in. And I think this is really exciting to us. A lot of more of the sensitive patient populations and comorbid patient populations, we're seeing a lot of utilization there. And I think this is a result, or we believe this is a result of the unique exposure profile of the product. Patient groups such as, and I think, Sarah, as you indicated, substance use, which is a critical and a serious issue that we face. We're seeing a lot of patients who struggle, and substance use disorders and ADHD are very often comorbid, and we see a lot of uptake in that specific patient population because of the sensitivities of that population, and our product being able to, or lacking that high immediate release component. So we're starting to see utilization there, and clinicians embracing it with respect to something I also mentioned earlier, which is the weight profile associated with it. Again, stimulants are very, one of the most significant issues we have with them is weight loss and loss of appetite. And we are, again, getting anecdotally from parents, patients, but also now from clinicians, seeing a benefit within that population, and they are typically they're moving a lot of patients to Jornay from other stimulants because of that weight profile. We also see some significant uptake within the patient population that's comorbid with autism as well. So again, these sensitive patients, and I think that's really very exciting to us. Again, measuring it, and we hope to get more data through real world evidence, but that's a work in progress.
Thank you. So from bringing treatments to a category where there are too few, from improving tolerability to improving quality of life, and just to bring better options for the right patient with the right profile, it looks like these innovations have really hit the mark, and so congratulations. But now, why don't we move to a few of the challenges? It cannot be easy to bring a pharmaceutical product for many, many years to market. So as you think about your careers and your experience, and this next question, I'd like you to consider, what are the real critical challenges that you or the company has faced? And in addition, if you'd like to take another turn to it, maybe perhaps you can offer a lesson from your experience to the public to help them understand or better understand or have more awareness for the process of innovating in medicine. So on this topic, since we have not yet started with Mike, why don't we start with Mike, and then we can move to Robert.
Sure. So one of the big challenges in designing a small molecule is actually finding the right selectivity profile. So really, it starts with the molecule design where the challenge begins. And in particular, we were working on a kinase, Janus kinase 1, that was part of a 4-kinase family of proteins that are very similar. So finding a molecule that bound to the important site within the protein for JAK1, but not to the other 3 JAKs, was really a critical breakthrough that our medicinal chemists made that enabled us to get into man and observe that we had a small molecule that had the kind of profile that could evolve into a medicine. I would say the next biggest challenge was around choosing the right place and the right patients who would benefit most from the drug. I think there were two features that made Sabinco maybe more challenging in that respect. One is it's a drug that blocks many different cytokines, And actually, we had very good reason to suspect it would work in a variety of different diseases. So signaling out atopic dermatitis as one that had a unique constellation of cytokines that would benefit particularly from this drug was a tough choice to make. And in conjunction with that, I mentioned that there was only one approved therapy. And actually, that was an approved therapy that really just hit the market relatively recently. And in the, I'd say in the kind of real world experience of developing drugs, sometimes you have to use conviction about where unmet need is because there's not market data that tells you that there's a large unmet need. That's something you have to listen to the patient, and sometimes the commercial teams that are looking at what the best place to bring forward new medicine options are don't have the same kind of information as they do with well-established conditions for which there's a good understanding of what a successful product would look like. So I think those were two of the challenges later on in development we had to overcome.
So Sans, I'll jump in. I think you mentioned me as going next. I won't talk about some of the challenges that Mike talked about in terms of early identification of the right compound and the specificity of the target. Those are all important challenges. It's not really my wheelhouse. So I'll mention two challenges, and one is a little bit unique to the heart failure world. And the other, I think, is unique to our times, and the latter one is probably one shared by many of you. The first that I mentioned is when you're running a development program for a heart failure medication, you're often faced with this decision at phase 2 of how good are your data in phase 2, and are they good enough to launch a many thousand patient cardiovascular outcomes trial. And in heart failure, you're often banking on, and this is the case for many other medications and approaches as well, you're banking on a biomarker, a molecule that you can measure in the bloodstream that gives you a sense of whether you're improving someone's heart failure. And in heart failure specifically, one we look at is called B-type natriuretic peptide. And we did, in fact, in phase 2, see a dose-related reduction in BNP. But it's a bit of a noisy signal, and you do have to basically take it on faith that the signal you're seeing is going to translate into a reduction in cardiovascular outcomes. So that's always a challenge. It is a bit of a gamble, and sometimes it pays off and sometimes it doesn't. I think the other challenge that I faced was doing a worldwide registration filing for a drug for approval during a pandemic. And so none of us was actually in the office during much of this work. It involves a large number of people from a wide range of functional areas that you have to bring together and develop a coherent package for regulators to review. And leading that size team remotely certainly was very challenging. I think everybody was quite dedicated to the process, so it did in the end go pretty smoothly, but it's not something that many of us have done before. So I think those were the two challenges I think this program had to face.
Thank you, Robert. Really good mention. We forget about the being in person and operating together. Volker, would you like to jump in on the challenges question?
Yeah, my predecessors here have addressed many of the important issues, but thank you. The medicinal chemistry is where it all starts. That's where you place your major bets. The biomarkers is what you hope for, but then again, it is often again a bet you place. So there are really specific risks and challenges. Just wanted to remind everybody, the additional risk is if you are a small biotech company in various investment cycles. Aurinia was running these trials with 20 people, 30 people, then eventually maybe 50 people total within an R&D organization that was then had to rapidly grow, adjust, and really run global clinical trials. Many sites in Latin America and South America and around the world where we were able to find these patients, and then again do the filing at least during the pandemic, which for us proved to be actually a little bit of a present in disguise, because we could work around the world with people in Australia, in Europe, and in the US and Canada, being able to contribute around the clock. And I guess people were sort of put to their desks. So when you have to file and write and analyze data, it's helpful. But what's not helpful is not to have the personal contact. But for us, it was really, did we select the right indication? Were we able to grow the company while we were transitioning from phase 2 to phase 3? And were we able to then put together a team that could file an NDA and launch the product? So those are formidable challenges for a small biotech company in a growth mode, having a very successful and meaningful drug. There are general issues with immunosuppressive agents and with the patient population, especially concerns around ensuring the safety during the clinical trials, but also ensuring that the clinical care is continued appropriately. So we learned the lesson, and we're here to tell it. It is all possible. Have faith in your teams, and have faith in building those deep partnerships with the patients, the patient communities, the treating physicians, and the clinical trial sites.
Thank you. And now with just a few minutes left, I'd like Bev and Sarah to round us out with a few comments on lessons learned or key challenges.
Okay, well, I'll keep it really brief, and I'll pick up on that last comment, Volker, you made in terms of faith in your teams, because I think that resonates with all of the speakers here, and whether it's your medicinal chemist team or whether it's that remote team pulling together that filing. And I think that for all of our companies, big or small, that those are challenges, and you get the right people and the right team together, and you can accomplish a lot, even through very challenging circumstances like COVID. I'll also echo the challenges of a small company. Because we also were very, very small. And I think as we pulled together our submission as well as ran our clinical trials, we were definitely in that low, less than 20 type numbers as well. And then I think different from maybe the other speakers here, our challenges, we don't go back to medicinal chemistry because we were working with a very, very well-known compound. So just very briefly, I think one of our significant challenges is the education side of that. How is it that you can do something new with something so old? And that becomes a very big challenge when you're financing, but when you're also trying to educate those physicians. So we had to really educate why this was different because of its absorption profile and everything. And we had to do that education during the challenges of COVID and access issues with getting to our physician audience. So that's a kudos to our commercial team after we transitioned and grew a commercial team, that they now had to go out and take on that challenge in the still challenging environment of COVID. So I'll leave it with that.
Thank you. And Sarah, close us out with us.
Yeah, so I mean, so many of my fellow panelists have mentioned really the key challenges. And just to echo, I mean, certainly challenges in discovery. I think challenges of seeking approval and launching a treatment during the pandemic are very common aspects. I'll just maybe highlight one other aspect that we encountered, which was really the importance of being able to pivot and develop a new hypothesis during the course of the program. I know with samidorphan, we acquired it through an academic industry partnership, and initially evaluated it for a very different indication around substance use disorders. But during development, potential effect on weight gain was noticed, and so we pivoted to a new unmet need. So a challenge, but also an opportunity. in an area where no FDA-approved treatments are available to address antipsychotic-associated weight gain. So we're grateful for the opportunity to explore and then ultimately bring a treatment for patients in need.
Well, wonderful resilience by these innovators. So thank you to you. Thank you for your scientific leadership, your investment in chronic diseases, serving some of the world's greatest medical unmet needs. And of course, thank you to the Galien Foundation. Please note this webcast will be available and broadcast across the Galien Foundation's homepage. Thank you.